Yes.
Yes.
The only thing I check, but okay. Thank you very much for this. Now we are at the last session. We have two new guests, and we have our three. I would call them rapporteurs. Let's start with how do we do that? Let's start with by hearing Sebastian Godinot, economist at WWF, European Policy Office. You focus especially on the EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan and on alignment of financial portfolios with the Climate Paris Agreement. So, what is your take from the report that you read? Of course, you focused less on the product report, I guess. But please give us your take. You have 5 minutes. Is it okay? Thank you. You have a microphone here. Thank you.
So I'm economist for the WWF European Policy Office. I'm currently working only on finance, essentially private finance, public finances a bit as well. I'm heading our team on sustainable finance. We have been following the EU Action Plan on sustainable finance quite a lot. We were part of the high-level expert group on sustainable finance in 2017 that issued a report with comprehensive report with lots of recommendations to the Commission. The Commission in turn itself turned it into an EU Sustainable Finance Action Plan early 2018, and on that basis issued also quite quickly a first wave of legislative proposals, 5 ones on sustainable finance for the private financial sector. The good thing is in the European Green Deal, the Commission has committed to this year review the Sustainable Finance Action Plan to take stock of what has been done, integrate the emergency issue, and change gears. They have already made public they want to increase the level of ambition, which is much needed, and update the plan for the next years. So I mean, there are different relevant proposals from the SMART project that fit pretty well with what we have been discussing and proposing as WWF, and I will underline a few.
Yes, I ask you to put them in relationship with what you advocate. Because,
yes, okay.
Because this is a session which is supposed to talk about bringing forward these proposals. So can we count on WWF to bring forward these proposals? Okay,
yes.
Thank you. That's the bottom line.
On this action plan on sustainable finance, actually, we've been doing a long list of needed reforms to specific files, so we can come back to the different files. And the SMART project mentions a few, but there are I think there are 4 what I call frontier issues that need to be integrated in this discussion on sustainable finance. The first one is the need for clarifying what is brown in the economy and in the financial system. And actually this is proposed by the SMART project. We need a brown taxonomy, the same way we need a green taxonomy to clarify what is really brown and green on a science-based way as much as possible. We don't have climate and environmental science to be very granular on virtually everything, but this is critical. And let's note that the taxonomy, the EU taxonomy that is currently being developed on the green side, is not only on climate. There are six objectives that cover virtually everything about the EU environmental acquis and the EU environmental legislative issues. So it's quite broad in terms of environment. It's not social yet. It's just environment with social do no harm, but that's the first step. So we need a brown taxonomy to clarify what is green. And of course, we need disclosure related to this brown taxonomy. There's also something mentioned by SMART, but it doesn't go far enough in our view, because currently there is disclosure related to different elements of the green taxonomy, but there are gaps and loopholes. And we think they should be ultimately a mandatory disclosure for all large companies and all financial institutions for all their financial products and instruments about how much, about their green and their brown exposure. And as long as we don't have this, we are missing parts of the big picture, and that risks meaning sub-effective strategies or also misleading investments. So that's the first issue. The second issue is to move beyond disclosure, realize that market disclosure is usually only a means to an end, and think why we think we need disclosure, and relate also the market approach, the financial approach, to the big picture goals that have been already agreed at public global level, which are the SDGs, for example, and the Paris Agreement on climate. And hopefully this year in September in China, new global objectives on biodiversity that are much needed. And there's a gap here in the translation between public goals and private markets. We have the Paris Agreement with an agreement from virtually all countries on the planet except one. About not having climate change above 1.5 or well below 2 degrees, right? In the EU, we have virtually all countries having mandatory climate targets. But then, how is it translated to the economy and to the financial system? It is not translated. It's up to each company to decide whether they will set their own climate or sustainability targets or not. In some sectors, there are some sector obligations, not really in terms of targets. I mean, there are different things here and there, but this is still very suboptimal and not complete. So we think it's time to move from these voluntary targets to mandatory sustainability targets for large companies and large financial institutions, because we run out of time. And waiting for voluntary targets, while we talk about 25 million companies in the EU, is not serious in terms of achieving our goals, our SDG and Paris Agreement goals. And it is not serious in terms of cutting our emissions by half in 10 years, for example, concretely. We will never make it with voluntary targets, because most companies just don't have targets at all. So the likeliness to have the economy in general and the financial system in general reaching an ambitious target without even setting the target itself. I mean, there are just options to get there. The first one is magic, and the second one is random. It will not work. So we need to move to mandatory sustainability target. The third issue I wanted to mention is to use more the retail investors. Retail investors are the middleman in the street. It's us. You know, we have 5K, 10K to invest somewhere in a fund. And this, as a whole, in total, this makes 35 trillion euro, according to Eurostat. This is an enormous amount of money. And retail investors, according to many recent studies, more than 70% of the retail investors want their money to be invested in a sustainable way. But when this money goes to the financial system, to investment firms, to asset managers, to pension funds, etc., this so-called sustainability preferences from retail investors are completely lost in the long investment chain. While this is a key rationale, a key argument for completely changing the way this investment system works. If, for example, if we consider that 70% at least of retail investors want their money invested in a sustainable way, that means, in my view, that sustainable funds should be a default option. And only if the retail investors makes explicit it does not want to invest in sustainable stuff, then it should be offered unsustainable or non-sustainable products.
Daniel Kahneman, the Nobel Prize, worked on this.
So
by default.
That's something important. We need to reverse this approach, because currently it's up to the retail investors to raise his hand and say to the investor, the pension fund, the asset manager, the bank, I want to invest in a sustainable fund. And he is supposed to be expert in terms of saying, I want this type of product and not this one, while he has no clue. And he can be flooded by the investment firm proposing this. So we need to reverse this. Okay, and the fourth last proposal is to develop gradually an EU framework to measure the sustainability impact of financial products and financial, let's say financial products. Because so currently we already have some asset managers in Europe who say, well, already 40% of the capital market in the EU is somehow integrated integrating sustainability criteria somehow. But what's the impact on the real economy? No clue. So we need to have to create a framework to measure the true impact of financial products on shifting the business models of the economy, the real economic companies. And this is very difficult. This is precisely why nothing exists. I mean, almost nothing. There are some first studies and some research in the tiny niche of impact investing. This is something like 30 billion euros out of 30 trillion, so that's 0.1% of the market or less. But we are still missing a mainstream framework to assess the real impact of a fund. And it's very difficult because we should not mix up green exposure and green impact. If I invest in a fund, an equity fund with listed equity, an equity fund that itself is selecting companies that are greener than others, what's my impact on the real economy? Do I really use this? I mean, is my money really being used to create a new plant, for example, a new wind farm plant or whatever? What's the real impact? In fact, it's very hard to measure because it's very indirect. There are many conditions. There are many factors. Is there additionality of my additional investment compared to, etc.? Are the green companies I'm investing in really lacking capital, and is it actually their obstacle, their limitation in terms of developing their green business, or is it a completely different issue? There's no demand, there are fiscal problems, etc. So this, we need to enter the details and to clarify this, and that's something I hope the Commission will consider for its renewed sustainable finance strategy.
Okay, thank you, Sebastian. I take from that the ants can change the world. The retail investors, I mean. But that's interesting because this is, we will talk to whom you will communicate, whom you want to impact with your recommendations. And I think, never thought that retail investors could make a difference. So now I turn to Isabelle Schömann. You were elected as confederal secretary at the ETUCS, the European Trade Union Confederation's 14th Congress in Vienna in May 2019. So you're the boss of all the trade unions in Europe. We didn't talk, to my taste, enough of the social aspect of sustainability. So thank you for being part of this panel. And it's great if you could. It would be great if you could give us your take of the different reports that you read on the result of the smart project. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm not the boss. I'm the representative, indeed, of 90 national confederation in the European Union and 10 European federations. So, and I'm part of a team of six people. So we are working together for the sake and for the interest of workers in and outside the European Union. So yeah, I'm really impressed, I must say. I'm really impressed because I think this is a very timely project, and I think this is a project that delivers so much. And I think here we really have to build on the real potentials of that project. In terms of environment, and I think that's what I heard. It is one of the main focus, and I think, but also in terms of the social dimension. And we met last year in a conference on the company law organized by the European Commission, and I just will start with this kind of experience I had, starting with this political mandate in June, meeting the European Commission on the issue of due diligence, meeting DG Justice, and we were a bit shocked, I can say so, not to be part of the picture. And DG Justice replied to me in terms of, discussing on due diligence, and DG Justice replied to me, oh, but we are sorry, social is not in anymore, it's environmental. So, if you want to speak about good cooperation, then let's speak about this sustainable and environmental dimension, the social is out. And I say, how can it be? You can't really think about companies, businesses, being sustainable businesses without the workers. I've heard from employers that without business there wouldn't be workers, and I can say the contrary, without workers there wouldn't be any business. So I think here we're facing an interesting situation where we really need to have what I call a cultural change, which is much more a behavioral change in the whole discussion we have being on sustainability. What do we understand? Do we have different sustainabilities? One social, one environmental, one economic, one political? Why not? But I think it's the wrong narrative, and I think we really have to avoid, and one of the behavioral change will be to avoid this silo approach. If you speak about the taxonomy in terms of sustainable finance, you will see environment, governance, social. And we heard yesterday at a meeting organized by an NGOs where we had the opportunity to meet some MEPs. We heard that, we have worked so hard on the sustainable finance and the taxonomy, but we missed the social part. We were so involved in the governance and the environment, but we missed it. That's a pity. So what? How can you imagine that the social is not involving the environmental and the environmental is not involving the social? And at the top of that, or encompassing all of that, you have the governance part. The governance part should be inclusive. You can't take sustainable decision at the plant level like at the political level if you don't involve, I would say on an equal basis, the people who are you are impacting with your political decision or with your operation as a business. So that will be my main message to you. And I think the proposal or the reform proposal you put on the table are quite valid, I must say. And we find ourselves back in your proposal. The first one is not to think a business or business model like it's equal productivity and competitiveness. I think we have to rethink businesses in terms of their purpose of businesses. And indeed, we have to look into the impact of the operation of businesses on the environment and on the people. And on the environment, you've been speaking about eco-design. I think this is potentially an aspect of it, but I would invite you to look also at the impact on people. How come that you, potentially me, order product online and we have no problem to that the product is delivered by Amazon? Do we think it is sustainable? We have bought a product which might be sustainable, but the way this product has been delivered to you, is it sustainable in terms of the working condition of the people? And I'm quite scared, and I think we raised the alert many times, and we will make it on the regular occasions. I think the link between sustainability and innovation that you will see all over the place, and especially in the frame of the MFF, which is the multi-annual financial program of the Commission, you will see that innovation, or you have this understanding that the innovation is for the sake of innovation. So you don't look into whether innovation delivers for all equally. And here I think we really have to be careful about the whole dimension on business model, new business model, equal online, equal platform, equal something which is good for all because it's quicker, because it's easier, because it's potentially less intermediaries or more intermediaries, but possibly at the end of the day delivering cheap product. Please look at how people are used and abused, and in relation to innovation, look at the relationship between workplace and artificial intelligence. Look how artificial intelligence, which is the innovation per se currently when you listen to the big players, Amazon being one of them, but I think if you read what the Commission is producing currently, it's all about innovation. Look at artificial intelligence. Today, the Commission has published its strategy on artificial intelligence and the digital future of Europe. You don't see really that there is an adaptation or a kind of critical assessment of artificial intelligence applied to the workplace. But artificial intelligence applied to the workplace might indeed bring some added value in terms of robotics, in terms of better working condition, in terms of what we would call in French pénibilité, so to reduce the difficulty of the job. But on the other hand, it's so much about surveillance. It's so much about machines taking decisions. We are impacting each of us in a very direct way, hiring and firing you without any possibility to have a recourse against this decision which is taken by a machine. So you have no manager to discuss with you why you have not performed a certain benchmark, or you have not reached certain benchmark. So I think here I would, and I've seen that the issue of innovation is brought back in terms of sustainable business, and I think I would be a bit careful in terms of the business model applying that. In terms of the finance, I think we have a clear demand next to being part of the governance structure of a sustainable finance. We have to link sustainable finance with conditionality. If you want to have access to public procurement as a business, you have to comply with certain conditions. And those conditions should be, first, human rights respect. So you have to respect human rights, and you have to respect, for us, the basic conditions that is laid on in the Treaty of the European Union, but also in national legislation. The first one, which is a fundamental rights and human rights, the right to organize, the right to negotiate at the workplace, and the right to have collective agreement, amongst others. But I could speak about health and safety, I could speak about working time, I could speak about work-life balance. So there is minimum you have to respect. And if you want to access public money, you have to have a collective agreement which fix actually wages and fix working condition in a decent way.
So do you advocate a social taxonomy?
I'm expecting something around the social dimension of the finance, sustainable finance.
Yeah, here, I mean, social taxonomy. I mean, we talked about green taxonomy. Here, social taxonomy. That means to define it, because everything you said can be interpreted and so on. We talk about very stringent norms.
You're exactly making the contrary what I was trying to give as a message. Do not fragment. Do not say this is environment, this is social, and this is government. In doing so, you leave the space to say, oh, I'm much more, my business is much more impacting the environment, so I chose the environment. And what is happening currently, if you look at any kind of corporate social responsibility, charter, codes, and whatever, what is on the basis, we respect human rights, but not all of them, of course. And the what that actually speaks to my consumers, so it's child labor, but I don't care about trade union rights. And if I can do anti-unionism campaign outside the European Union while I'm the champion of the social dialogue at home, I will do it. So I think here you can't, if you start dividing those elements in terms of the sustainable finance, then you give way to the choose and pick what we already have, and it doesn't deliver. It doesn't deliver, and this is, I think, something which is based on large range of evidence.
Okay, thank you. Jay, can you comment on that? Because we haven't heard much about the social element of sustainability. And here we talk about sustainable finance. You hear what Isabelle just said. So how do we integrate social rights into sustainable finance? I mean, is it, we talked about sustainable finance, but it's more about green finance. Here, where is the dimension? I mean, we talk about the application, the translation concretely into the finance world of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So where are the social rights? Where is the social aspect?
In my view, there is none in the way it's set up. And I think that is a function, and I've talked about this before, of the fact that a lot of financial risk management is based upon loss estimates. So climate change being and I know people keep talking about climate change, but it's the issue that dominates the press, etc. And I think that because a large portion of the financial system is exposed to losses from environmental phenomena and in relation, and of course speculative losses in relation to climate change, then they have an incentive to consent to regulations which in some ways go to mitigating the potential costs to them. In other words, the regulations are designed to protect the financial system from climate change in that sense, to protect investors from the environment. And I think that the problem in relation to these less defined problems or issues, such as workers' rights, such as a just transition, such as equality, is that you can't necessarily put a dollar or a euro or a pound figure on them. So the whole calculus becomes very different, and it lacks the momentum in relation to in terms of designing regulations which will gain consent from investors and from financial institutions themselves, which to a degree is the model that certainly the EU is working towards. I'm not saying that you can't put a dollar value on labour rights abuses or certain ecological costs or ecosystem damage or societal breakdown, if you like. Of course you can, but those costs won't necessarily directly affect the balance sheets of some of these institutions and are so nebulous and uncertain that it doesn't really enter the realm of, well, what is the risk-reward basis for us making that investment? And it's been a challenge, I think, certainly throughout this project, to think about ways in which those sorts of considerations can be incorporated. It doesn't mean it's a satisfactory state of affairs, but I think that is probably the reason why these social issues are not dealt with at the level of sustainable finance.
Okay.
Pricing those abuses or injustices it's very difficult.
Yeah.
Whereas perhaps pricing, climate change, whilst the estimates are extremely wild in terms of the ranges.
Damaging.
Yeah.
We get the message. I just wanted Sebastian to react to that, how to integrate the social aspect into sustainable finance, and then you will tell us about the risk of sustainability, but seen from the social viewpoint. Okay?
Yes. I strongly agree with what Isabelle said. For example, if you take the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, they are said to be indivisible. That means you don't cherry pick. I'm very good on 1, 3, and 7. Of course, on the other ones, I'm disastrous. I'm completely counterproductive. But on 1 and 7, I'm really, really good, guys. And then I deserve to be in a sustainable fund on SDG 1, etc. That doesn't work, for sure. Because even in a very concrete way, the environmental changes we need to undertake in the entire global economy are so ambitious, and we need to do this so quickly that we need the backing of the citizens, the workers, etc., so that they put enough pressure constantly on policymakers and on economic decision makers to shift quickly enough, because time is of the essence. Otherwise, we will fail. We need a very strong support of the citizens, of the workers, etc., to make sure these environmental changes happen as quickly as we need. Now going to something important in my view to clarify how to make this work in practice, because between what we have today, which is essentially a completely unsustainable economic and financial system, towards a fully sustainable system, there's a transition. And by definition, transition periods are more or less bumpy, because I mean, we make different tries, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, etc. And we need to, and at the same time, we know we need to go very fast. So there are two sides of the same thing, which are, in my view, the do no harm side and the do good side, right? And I think it's important to differentiate them. The do no harm side is, for example, is integrated, for example, in the EU taxonomy as a do no significant harm. That means an economic activity in the green taxonomy, because it's only on green, on environment so far, it is eligible, but there are two conditions. The first one is in Article 13, there are social safeguards, and if any activity, even the greenest in the world, does not meet these social safeguards, it's out. And the second one is the do no significant harm for any other environmental objective. For example, if there are 6 environmental objectives, if you have an activity that is really good, outstanding on climate mitigation, but very tricky on other issues, other sectors, other environmental objectives, it's also out. So that in that case, you ensure a do no harm approach. That means you're not necessarily good on everything, but at least you're not bad on everything, and you are good on something specific. And this do no harm approach, in my view, has to be translated now in the EU into an environmental and human rights due diligence regulation. That's something we are cruelly missing in Europe. There are more and more regulatory pieces in different countries in Europe. The duty of vigilance law in France, for example, and there are other examples in other countries. We need to get there, and there is a major hook with the European Green Deal of the Commission. It committed a do no harm oath. So that's really the opportunity to get there and to require, at least for all large European companies, this requirement to set up, to disclose of course, but also to set up environmental and human rights due diligence process, okay? And the second part is a do good side. This is to make sure the company has a substantial positive contribution on something. This is what the taxonomy requires. But this is also what I was mentioning in terms of sustainability targets. Targets, in my view, are not only to stop doing damage. I think this is, in my view, it should be a minimum. Targets are to reach something positive, to really have a positive contribution, not only to your wallet, but also to the society and the economy as a whole. And this is why I was saying before, we need to move also to mandatory sustainability targets, science-based as much as possible. I mean, where relevant. Because otherwise, waiting for the companies to do this alone is not enough. We know they are under lots of short-term pressure, lots of competition, etc. I mean, they have lots of good and bad reasons not to take action and not to be ambitious. While now, we are, as von der Leyen herself said, we are on the man goes to the moon moment. We need to have a moon shooting strategy and saying by 10 years we will achieve the Paris Agreement and we will achieve all the SDGs. We're currently completely off track, but technically this is feasible. So I think we need to get there.
Thank you. Give your microphone to the lady on your right. Beate.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted actually, first of all, now to compliment and broaden a bit what Jay said, because of course Jay's diagnosis of the Sustainable Finance Initiative, I think, and the reasoning that has informed it is very correct. And in that sense, it is on the one hand really wonderful, and on the other hand, very far away from what we need. And although it is difficult, and it cannot be, you cannot put an exact price tag on every risk, I just want to make very clear in this final discussion that what the SMART project proposes is a broad set of reforms that includes a duty to undertake sustainability due diligence for businesses and for the financial sector, and specifically, as Eléonore was talking about, for the products. So, and the sustainability due diligence includes human rights due diligence. This is the thing that we are doing in SMART, that we are connecting various initiatives and ideas and strengthening and broadening them, because we cannot achieve sustainability, we cannot even mitigate climate change if we don't also achieve social justice. So I'm sure others in the panel would like to say something before I conclude, but I just wanted to clarify that definitely it is exactly not silo thinking, but the broad research-based concept of sustainability that informs every part of our reform proposals.
Okay, I want Eléonore to make a comment on this and circular economy. Okay, the social dimension of circular economy. Please, you have the floor.
Yes, it's a circular economy was advertised as great for jobs. It would bring many new jobs to Europe in great financial difficulties. The reality is that it has brought new jobs, but they are dirty. They are badly paid. They jobs that are not bringing a lot of positive for the people and in the economy. So. Sorry, I will try to continue. The circular economy that does not include people, and that is only on the circularity and on environment, is bound to fail, because circular economy is about consumers, and consumers are workers, and if
They're schizophrenic.
Yes, but if you
Who buys from Amazon here? Who buys from Amazon? Okay. No, don't be ashamed. I also buy from Amazon. My book is on Amazon, which prints on demand, no waste. Okay.
So I mean, there needs to be a broad discussion, and it's true. Eco-design is about designing products for environment, but it's also about designing products for durability. So you have lesser of the cheap, low-quality products that are being produced, and that are the ones that lead to exploitation of workers. And you have lesser of the waste that involves a lot of dirty jobs. But in our big report on products, one of the ideas that we propose is to start reconsidering the type of manufacturing that we have, and how we we can include a manufacturing that is both environmentally friendly but also socially friendly, so that you guarantee a minimum stock, but you also start changing consumption behavior by saying, well, we can't have availability of everything at any point. Consumption requires a certain length of time, and indeed Amazon type of systems are not sustainable, even though they might be environmentally friendly, which also is kind of doubtful. Definitely not socially, but it's a broad perspective.
Isabelle, are you satisfied with what you heard? You don't have to.
Partly. No, just to come back on the issue of circular economy, I think it's a very interesting issue, and I just would like to give you an example. My previous life, as I worked at the Commission as member of the Regulatory Scrutiny Board, we had to look into the revision of eco-design, and we look at the revision of batteries. And it was linked to another dossier, by chance, which was circular economy. And it was an impact assessment. I'm sure you're aware of impact assessment. This is one of the self-inflicted exercise the Commission has to do before proposing or putting on the table a legal proposal. And this impact assessment has in principle to look into three dimensions that could impact the product or the legal proposal could impact, which is economic, of course, social, and environmental. And on the issue of the batteries and the circular economy, interesting enough, we have identified that the company who produced the batteries, and I'm sure you're aware that in the batteries you have a substance which is quite not toxic. And I looked at it because I couldn't recall what it was. It's lithium, and this substance is very toxic. So the companies who produce batteries have to be very careful about the use by worker producing the battery when they are exposed to this substance. And because it's a toxic substance, we're referring back to a directive which is on health and safety, and a directive which is spatially looking into the limits of exposure of workers to specific toxic substances. And you can't go above this exposure in terms of time and in terms of the different other technical element. But when you recycle those batteries, the enterprises that recycle the batteries are not the one who produced. So the workers, those companies do not fall under the same legal regime than the one who produced the batteries. So they have not to apply those health and safety protection measures. And I think this is one of the dimensions of, I understand the whole circular economy, that you have to produce something which is also respecting the working conditions and working environment of workers. But in the circular economy, you have also very critical elements where you cannot, because of the existing lack of legislation, you cannot protect workers properly because they do not fall into the category of the workers working in the business which has to apply this and that. And I think this is one of the dimensions of the circular economy that has to be really looked into. But again, the approach is silo, eco-design, and circular economy, two different things. And circular economy is, of course, having a very good impact on the environment, so let's do it. The social one, you have to look at it, and you have really to try to dig into the whole system to understand what it's all about and what are the potential danger for the ones potentially dealing with that. And just to come back on Amazon and close with Amazon, is not just not unsustainable, it's slavery. Let's look at it and face the reality. It's slavery, and we can't accept slavery nowadays, here and outside the European Union. So so much on that. But I think one of the dimensions I would stress, and we are very much working with the European Trade Union Institute on the issue of what we have called good corp. So we also have a concept of what a good business could be. And I think one of the dimension we have identified, and we've been working on that since a long time, and for which we have gathered so much evidence, is that good corp equal democracy at the workplace. And what we call democracy at the workplace is simply to comply with national and European legislation, and I can say ILO convention, on workers' representation at the workplace, information on time, and consultation of the workers' representative, so that they can participate to what they are eligible to participate, to shaping and anticipate the changes that will change their work environment and working condition. That's in the secondary legislation. This is in the treaty, and this is up to the national level. So I think here this is one of the dimensions. We also have, in principle, the European Works Council. So this is something that actually every multinational operating in the European Union should have. And despite a recast in 2009, we haven't been able to push for more. And I think this is also a loophole. And the last point, what I would mention is that we need to have board level representation. So we need to have workers and worker directors at the board level to be able to shape in a much better, sustainable way how businesses take decisions.
Thank you very much. I hope you pardon us. There is no time for question. I hope you pardon us to have focused completely this wrap-up session